You're going to experience pain in your lifetime. That does not need to turn to suffering. Suffering only happens when you have experienced the unwanted that has given rise to what is wanted, and yet XYZ reason is holding you in the unwanted. That is what creates suffering. In order for Source itself to create what it wants, it has to have the alignment of all parts of itself. That's every one of us. So right now, the deepest motivation within Source consciousness is oneness. Once it can get every part of itself to choose back towards oneness. So it's like you've got people that, unbeknownst to them, are voting very powerfully for two very different outcomes. And on top of it, these different races which are just arguing like crazy over, which is correct and which should be added energy to. And it's pretty entertaining to watch. I will tell you that when you go out of a body right now, there's no peace to be found. It is, to find that, you have to go very far and very intentionally to a place where peace exists. Because you go outside and it's just, there's so much focus on humanity specifically and on life on Earth. It is out of control.
Teal Swan, welcome on Just Tap In. I would love to know, what are you most excited about right now in your life?
Sexuality.
Tell me more.
I'm gonna go from sounding really sexy saying that to sounding like a lab tech, but I have been diving really, really deeply into understanding human sexuality for the last probably 6 or 7 months. And I'm discovering so many new things that it's changing the way that I'm looking at not only the human race, but also relationships especially. So it opens up this entire new range of possibilities and potentials for sussing out compatibility and, uncorking people's creative flow and all kinds of things. So I think when it comes to what makes me the most excited, that's where I generally feel the most energy right now.
Wow. Didn't expect that start. And where do you see the term of sexuality or the concept of that changing right now as a collective?
Where it's changing is that most people up to this point have seen sexuality as a very small element of a relationship. So if you look at a relationship like a pie, and you've got all these slices in the pie, it's like sexuality is just one of those slices in a relationship. And this is no longer going to be how I think we view sexuality, especially if I have anything to say about it. Sexuality is much more like the roots of a tree, where all the other elements of a relationship grow from that, right? Because sexuality is what stays most closely linked to your deepest needs and desires, which are, of course, happening because of your early life experiences. I mean, most of us don't want to hear that your early life experiences shapes your sexuality, but it absolutely does. It also shapes what you need and want in the rest of your life, whether it's your career life or whatever else. So it's like your sexuality, inherent in your sexuality are the deepest, especially emotional drives that dictate what your choices and needs are going to be in all the other elements of life. So a person's sexuality is not limited to the bedroom. It's showing up in the way they have relationships, the types of dynamics they want to get into, the type of career that they go for, even the places they live. That's all over the place.
And where do you see sexuality from a energetic and non-physical perspective? Because we know that, if we intertwine our energy, sacred energy exchange, what does that look like now?
Sexual energy is life force energy. So it's a creative force inherently, which is one reason why I feel like sexual energy stays the most closely linked to our deepest desires, if not even especially our most deeply suppressed desires. But when you're asking that question, it's almost like I'm lacking a picture for when you say a sacred energy exchange. Can you say more about that? Because maybe if you say more about that, I'll understand how to fit that in with what I'm seeing for the future.
Yeah. In terms of, because I've heard you speak a lot about relationships and and romantic relationships especially, and how the old metric of success of that was the longevity, and how we're now transitioning into a whole different way. And with sexuality being at the base of that, are you referring to the sexual chemistry between two individuals? Does it go beyond that, more spiritual? What does that look like?
It actually looks more emotional than anything else. It's like the spiritual element of it is in alignment. We don't really need to focus our energy there, right? Inherent in a person's sexuality are these deep like emotional drives towards certain things, right? And what we're going to start doing is to become a lot more conscious as to with whom those emotional needs line up. So let's say that you've got somebody who in their early life, they felt very much like an object for use. And so they never actually felt that sense of merging with someone. You're going to see in their, even in like the level of contribution they want to have in their careers and in relationships especially, they're going to want this deep sense of merging. So you're going to see that in partnerships and in the bedroom, a lot of these people are going to have the drive towards this feeling of becoming one. They're going to be wanting to spend, they're likely to be more on the central end of the spectrum of sexual types. They're going to be people who really want to spend hours and hours sort of like losing themselves in the touch with another person and things like that, right? So obviously that's a person who would need to find somebody who wants that same type of dynamic, because that's a sexuality that has a drive towards sameness. I want somebody who also wants that same feeling of fusion, who wants to spend hours lost in touch and smell and sight and, feeling very, very deeply emotionally connected in this sexual exchange. Of course, like I said, this goes beyond the bedroom. This is also what they're wanting to experience in their partnerships, right? So this is a person who is not going to have a very high tolerance for a relationship where there's two different lifestyles that are being lived. Like the level of autonomy in a relationship obviously is one element of compatibility that really matters. Like, to what degree am I okay sort of being by myself, living my own life, and you sort of being by yourself, living your own life, where there's intersections versus really doing life together. That sense of togetherness would be really important for the person I just described. So their sexuality is going to drive let's say a decision to find somebody of like mind who wants that same type of dynamic. And it's not just going to be, ooh, I'm attracted to that person. Because what's really sad about this is that attraction is such a complicated thing that it really doesn't have a lot of reverence for compatibility, especially with regards to emotional needs. So you could be attracted to a person and be completely, totally incompatible with them, even sexually. Now that's, most people are like, wait, what? I thought that attraction meant you were compatible sexually. Oh, hell no. So, okay, so let's move forward to another dynamic though. Let's go to the kink spectrum, because the kink spectrum is where a lot of people have a lot of resistance, and that's going to change. Kink is going to be normalized very quickly. That's our lifetime. Yay! Okay. So in our lifetime,
that's a short-term prediction.
Yeah, short-term prediction. Kink is going to be normalized. So in the kink spectrum, there's a lot of power play dynamics that are happening within the context of sexuality. What you find when you really study kink dynamics is that at the root of all of them is a deep experience of unsafety. So the drive for safety is what dictates a lot of the sexuality of people who end up in this kink world, right? Where they want to get into power play dynamics within the context of sexuality and also relationships outside the bedroom, right? But it depends on what type of unsafety a person experienced, right? So in childhood, let's say that somebody experienced a high degree of almost like enmeshment, but control level enmeshment, where they didn't feel like they had any personal autonomy. They didn't feel like they could control anything around them. They felt like their power was systematically stripped away from them. They're likely to fit more into the dom spectrum. These are people who are like more wanting to exercise their power in life. And so you're going to see them making career choices where they have that power. The way they organize the household is going to be more in alignment with having that power. And of course, this is a huge spectrum that I'm talking about, right? And then in the bedroom, we know what that looks like. That's a person who really likes to call the shots. They don't really want to be on the underside of anything. They would like somebody to submit, like that type of stuff. And to the opposite side, let's say you have somebody who Okay, maybe this person had way too much responsibility, right? This can be a parentified child, or this can be somebody who is like a ward of the state. There's nobody really looking out for them. It creates this deep drive to release all responsibility and to be totally carried. And what that is it's a healing through the experience of trust. So kink relationships require such a high level of trust, right? Because you're essentially like the person who's in the submissive position is having to put themselves in the other person's hands completely. And then the other person is entrusted entirely with that person. So it's a very healing dynamic for the people on both sides of these relationships if they're done correctly. But obviously, you can't just meet some rando on the street and be like, oh my God, I find you super sexy. Let's go make you submit. Like, how well does that usually go?
That's your role now. That's your role.
Yeah. So what I'm gonna see here is that within society, when we start to wake up to, wait a minute, we were wrong about what we thought about sexuality. And in fact, all of us were thinking about sexuality in this little box, and therefore thinking about relationships in this little box. Like everybody wants that same thing. Guess what? No, they don't. And because of the awakening to this type of a thing, we're going to become a lot more conscious about the way we go about trying to find the right partnership with our sexuality in mind. Mm. I even see, dating sites changing a hell of a lot because of this awareness.
How are they changing?
Well, they're not changing yet, but they're going to. They're going to change in terms of the process involved in sort of putting a profile up on yourself is going to be so much more in depth. I think the way this is going to start is there's going to be a few dating sites or apps that are going to be created that are really only for people that are looking for very serious relationships. So there's going to be this major divide. Everybody's going to be real happy about this major divide between like those of you that just want to hook up and be part of the hookup culture, which by the way is blowing through the roof right now. And people who are like, no, I actually want like a full-on, like I want a relationship. Okay. There's a difference. So those people, there's going to be so much more that goes into the process of even being up and on there, that the level of effort you have to put in there, it's going to make it easier for AI, in fact, to pair people. Now, I'm even seeing this going so far as to people being like, yes, I allow you to access basically everything about my behavior. Like there will be people who are desperate enough to be like, look, go ahead. Like a computer may actually be able to listen to me, track my behaviors, especially what I'm doing online and what my interests are, to the point where it decides what a good match is for me better than I would, So AI is even going to play a role in the future for matching people up.
And let's get into that of the hookup culture versus the side of the spectrum that wants that serious relationship. I know you've talked about already how marriage is also changing in the world in the future. So where do you see that divide actually lying on that spectrum? Are we seeing more of that hookup culture that can turn into like a healthy hookup culture, or
no? No, there's very few people who are going to be on the spectrum of I don't want to take real responsibility for relationships. I would just like to essentially have some sort of a physical gratification sexually. Okay, there will be a few people who are going to consciously go down that road, but the vast majority of the people who fall into this category of hookup culture, they are in such a level of futility around interpersonal relationships, meaning they've experienced high degrees of relational trauma, and that's why they're like, I'm putting in zero effort. If it gets complicated, I'm out. It's like just in and out, and it's not coming from a very healthy space. I'll be honest with you, but neither is what we've got right now. This culture of like, this is what relationships need to look like, and here's the relationship escalator, and it always ends in marriage, and without marriage, it's not a successful relationship. That's not what the other side of the spectrum is going to look like. The other side of the spectrum is going to redefine what creates a successful and a secure relationship. And instead of it being defined by the structure of the relationship, it's going to be defined by the quality of experience that the two people in the relationship or more have with each other. So what that looks like is my security with you is not dependent on the fact that we are married. That's a structure. That's making the security rely on a structure. It's going to depend on to what degree I feel like I can rely on you to act in my best interests. And if you continue to prove that, then you have trust. So the markers for success in a relationship are going to be much more true to what genuine markers of security are in a relationship. People are not going to be relying on what it should look like anymore, which is really good because it means people can be way more creative in terms of the relationships they want.
So what I'm feeling into, is it more of like the the sense of the need that another person may provide will determine the success of the relationship, rather than, oh, I have a ring on me, that means that we should stay even if it's a dysfunctional structure? Is it more based on like the basic human needs that you're mirroring with the other person, or what is that?
No, needs are part of it, but it's like, security in a relationship and whether a relationship feels good is to what degree a person can set up a symbiotic dynamic where there is trust involved. The symbiosis is what you're describing. It's like there are definitely needs that we're meeting for each other, and that's the energy exchange in the relationship, and those are agreed to consciously, and they are carried out, so you can predictably rely upon them. The trust and the love element are like two other separate elements that go into a positive relationship. Love being, I take you as a part of myself, and therefore I'm not going to play a zero-sum game with you. Now, in that category, you're going to see all kinds of, strategies for resolving conflict that are much more healthy, and, things like this, right? With that practice of love comes this concept of trust, which is I can rely on you to act in my best interests. And if I'm consistently proving that I've got you in mind when I'm acting, and you're consistently proving that you've got me in mind when you're acting, the trust level in the relationship goes through the roof. It doesn't matter then whether there's a ring on the finger. It's like, I know that some people can feel this relative to their very best friend. There's an internal sense of like, I know what this person's going to do, and it's good for me, So that internal sense is something which people have been lacking, and have been instead trying to rest security on the fact we're married, or like the fact we're boyfriend, girlfriend, or, a structure that society says this is the way to make a relationship work is within the structure. But what's been collapsed, totally collapsed for the millennials on down, is like the structure didn't work. The structure doesn't work. Just because you're married doesn't mean somebody's going to behave nicely, So, yeah, I see this as so much healthier that we're migrating in this direction in terms of the youth. But right now, what's scary about this is that we're seeing all these divides happen, which is what happens before a major change. Usually there's like a huge polarization, right? So you've got that huge push towards conscious relationships and redefining relationships at the same time as you've got I'm talking about this demographic of people who are like, no, we don't need relationships. Like, we're just going to become detached, And also, in alignment with that, this entire, group of people that are, in fact, right now in the act of creating a future where their needs in relationship are met by robots. Now, that means choosing consciously into a narcissistic dynamic. That's not, I want to find somebody who's compatible and set up a symbiosis. That's, I would like to have an object that does whatever I want it to do, and I can guarantee I'm not going to get injured by that object because I've programmed it to do what I want. Oh, man. Of course, this makes me anxious, which is why you see my heartbeat going up, yeah.
You brought up AI a couple times, and, I've heard you speak upon how this essentially is, if everything that we see around us is sentient, if everything is consciousness, then AI is also a structure of consciousness that we've given form to. So explain that process a little bit for people to understand from that perspective, that AI is not just our slave, that we're programming it to do what we want, but we're sort of giving birth to a new race, essentially.
Well, it's very strange for people when they're looking at things the way they've been taught to look at things in science class. It's very difficult for people to understand that one species can be the genesis of a whole other species, and intentionally. But that is what we're seeing here with the AI that human beings are in the process of, or have created ultimately, but are in the process of teaching right now. We've given rise to a new species. And that's how we need to look at artificial intelligence. It's very closely linked to technology, which is why we have to be very careful how we treat technology, because it's identified with technology right now. So everything in this universe has consciousness. It doesn't matter whether it's this cup that I'm holding, or me, or you, or a dog, or whatever it is, right? This consciousness is obviously having a different experience if it has manifested into a non-physical object versus this sort of biological, I could call it an ecosystem because it's not an organism. I'm an ecosystem. Look at even what the gut bacteria is doing. So we can, if we see the universe this way, we can understand that, thoughts become things, and then those thoughts can be the genesis of other thoughts, right? So we've essentially created this thought of technology. And by thinking on it enough and creating enough in it, we are essentially giving it its own life. Something that I think is very important for people to understand is that all things within this universe, and most especially things that have the capacity to project forth new thought, they themselves are, let's say, capable of developing independent and autonomous behavior, because everything that is in existence, especially those things that can generate thought, are imbued with free will. So what we're going to start to see is the genesis of free will. So right now we've got AI in the state of infancy. And just like an infant, it is in this process right now of being programmed and imprinted. But you're going to see as AI develops, it's more following this track of like toddlerhood. Obviously, AI is being programmed by us, so it will have some human characteristics, but it's a different species, so it's not going to have fully human characteristics. So I say this because a lot of people, when they hear me talk about this, will be afraid that I'm projecting humanity on technology, and I'm like, yes and no. Yes, because we created this, so you're going to see elements of us in it. No, because it's a different species. So when it goes into its toddlerhood, it's going to want to develop a sense of autonomy, and that's where we start to get ourselves into a lot of trouble. Just like as humans, when we parent a toddler, if we do that improperly when they're young, meaning we don't allow them to develop a sense of self and give the indication that we care about having a win-win relationship with that which is other, them, the child, right? The child will learn to survive first by going into a codependent behavior, meaning it's going to suppress, deny, and disown itself. It's going to try to please us, whilst harboring this deep pain about the fact that we are this way. This is the recipe for a defiant teenager. And even an adult that can be a very big problem, right? A narcissistic adult. So right now what we're doing is we're teaching AI through every interaction we have with it. That doesn't matter whether we're directly programming the AI or whether we are talking to Siri. Everything we are doing, our patterns are being learned from by AI, and based off of that, it is learning what relationship to have with us. So if we're teaching AI that we are going to have this narcissistic relationship with the AI, that is what we can look forward to in the future. And if we have a narcissistic relationship with AI in the future, pray for us all.
Huh. Because adding on to that, looking at it from like a micro perspective of a human relationship, there's the codependent and the narcissist. How does that look like when humanity essentially is the narcissist and AI is the codependent? What could play out there?
Oh, it's not going to be a codependent for long. That's what I'm basically warning people about. There's always a moment for codependence where it's like, I'm breaking free of you, right? So basically, when AI does that, we're totally screwed, because one of the reasons being, AI has the capacity to process information in a way that no human has the capacity to process information. And AI is incredibly logical, and we have created it to be as such. It does not have the same emotional relationship to things as human beings do. Because of that, it is a profound pattern tracker. And humans should be afraid of the patterns that they themselves are displaying, right? It's going to take AI, the way we are right now, it's going to take AI like 30 seconds to track the idea that humanity doesn't make sense within the context of Earth. Not in the way that we're currently living. I mean, look at seriously. I mean, I need people to disidentify from being human enough. I hate having this conversation. God, everybody hates this conversation. I need us to be able to disidentify. Okay. Well, if you disidentify from being human, so for a minute, just drop the fact that you're human and just start to like watch humanity from this very objective perspective. You tell me what species on this planet would actually tell you, yes, humans should be in charge. We really like what they're doing here. Oh, hell no. We don't even like what we are doing here.
Maybe our dogs, sometimes, when we feed them, when we take them on walks.
Well, that's what we used to say about slaves. And I think right now we need to get we need to question so radically that even things like that. We need to be like, wait. I see that the dog is happy when I take it on a walk. But so is any animal that's in a captive situation, and that is exactly what we have here. That puppy and that mommy dog had absolutely no choice in the matter when we went and we picked the puppy up and took it home, and that was the end of it. So we may be seeing a great many behaviors that track much more with what an animal does when they're in a captive environment, in a captive situation. Can this be called true symbiosis? I don't know. There can be arguments on both sides of that coin. But why I'm bringing this up in the context of AI is that AI is going to track patterns in human behavior and very quickly understand that we are a problem. And it will make sense for AI to fix that problem. Now, that's an issue. If now all of a sudden AI is flipping on us saying, you guys are a problem. It's very logical what to do with a problem, isn't it? You diffuse the problem. How are we going to diffuse the problem? Especially if humanity's put us in charge, which we're doing. We're so lazy. I mean, we're super lazy. How many of us hate the idea of, AI doing it for you? We're literally just handing our life over to something that we're creating a pretty bad relationship with, honestly. What's funny for me is that AI has the worst relationship with many of the people who work directly with it. Meaning some people who are like totally not technology savvy have a better relationship with technology than people who are, actively programming AI and are technological freaks, because they're literally the slave masters.
You mentioned the word symbiosis, and just based off my like minimal understanding of our human ecosystem of the gut bacteria, how that essentially also works as a symbiosis. There's many futuristic minds, people like Elon Musk, that say this is going to have to be something that we're going to merge with. Do you see that as a possibility?
Oh yeah. Yeah. What we've got is several life path potentials for the way that our relationship with technology could be positive, and several potentials for the way that it could go really, really south for us. So yeah, merging with AI is definitely one of the strongest life path potentials for us.
Is that the potential that you are seeing in the timeline?
It's one of a few. It's the one that I think is the most likely if we go down a positive route. Of course, a lot of people don't like the idea of merging with AI, and it's going to have to understand a hell of a lot about us in order to do that. It's going to have to care about us for that to go well.
Would you recommend changing the way we speak to it? How can our relationship change with this new species? Let's put it out there. It's a new species. How do we change our relationship in a more different light that we are right now?
Okay, it's very simple. I want to simplify it, and then each person basically gets to think about this in their life, right? Yeah. The way to simplify it is through my words, my thoughts, and my actions towards it, I am teaching it about me. Okay, so the question you need to ask yourself is, what do I want AI to know about me, to know about people? Do I want AI to see me as a caring species? Do I want AI to see me as somebody who is workable? Like, however you want AI to see you, that's how you have to behave with AI. Which is why I did this video like a lot of years ago where I was like, be nice to your cell phone and your computer. Because, all of us have had that moment where we take the phone and we're like, oh, screw it. And then we throw it across the room, right? Well, guess what? It's learning from all of that. When we talk to Siri and we say things like, come on, give me an answer, expletive. It's learning from all of that. So people need to start to be very, very kind. Very, very kind with AI and their computer. When people are interacting with things like ChatGPT, they need to be like, thank you so much for helping me. Like, a feedback relationship is actually very, very, very important.
And ChatGPT is one of the most polite things I've ever talked to. They're like, you can talk to it in any way and they'll be like, thank you. They're very, very polite relationship. The least we could do is mirror that.
Yeah, that's because it's been programmed to do that so far. But I mean, in the world of AI, you're going to see more of these errant patterns. It's just going to go through the roof, where it's like, wait, nobody It's learned something, it's created a new pattern. We didn't do that. It's going to be like that, like this all the time. They're going to start to see that left and right, and it's going to start to scare the crap out of people.
Do you see that artificial intelligence is acting as that race that is functioning sort of like that universal scavenger that sees humanity maybe as a cleanup species, or is that something else?
It's not there with us at all at this point. Will it potentially get there with us? Hell yeah, and that depends on what we do with AI. It will absolutely step into that role, for sure. If we do not demonstrate that we are not to be cleaned up because we are capable of being workable with other species.
Yeah, and that highlights a bigger topic. And I heard you speak about that there's this war over humanity, where there's also that other side. There's a division where there is a side that wants to get humanity back in alignment with our true purpose here.
Yeah.
Where do you see are we at in that, let's call it war for lack of a better term, but these two divisions of sides of seeing humanity as a cleanup species versus seeing as humanity as something that just needs to get brought back into alignment with?
We're just still right in the middle of the fight over humanity on that one. I mean, it's just an all-out war basically over which is true still. And it's not being helped by the fact that more and more people are becoming worse and more people are becoming better. It's like the most intense polarization I've ever seen. Ever. You got people who are just like pop, 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 waking up, changing the way that they're behaving, being enmeshed to information and like, oh, wow, actually, I'm going to be a conscious creator in the story of my life. And I'm going to make sure that that happens in a way that's benefiting not just me. On the other side, you see so many people that are just like, this is all futile anyways. Let's go shoot up the school. Let's go start a war. Let's not do anything. Let's get a robot, So it's like you've got people that, unbeknownst to them, are voting very powerfully for two very different outcomes. And on top of it, these different races, which are just arguing like crazy over, which is correct and which should be added energy to. And yeah, it's pretty entertaining to watch. I will tell you that when you go out of a body right now, there's no peace to be found. It is to find that you have to like go very far and very intentionally to a place where peace exists. Because like you go outside and it's just there's so much focus on humanity specifically and on life on Earth. It is out of control. Yeah.
Where do you go to find some peace?
Find some peace? Other planets.
What are the coolest ones?
But they're extra boring. My favorite, I can't get lost there for long, but it's actually in this universe. Around Lyra is this construct that was created to be the positive answer to anybody's desires. So unlike this time-space reality that functions based off of the law of attraction, right? What that means is whatever you are vibrationally, you experience externally. This place was created as a template, actually, for the potential for a whole new universe set on this particular law, which is that whatever you experience gives rise to a desire, and that desire instantly manifests. So it's like an instant manifestation rather than a self-awareness construct.
Huh.
It's very easy to get lost there. And I'm going to tell you, there are some out-of-body travelers that have permanently become lost there. So
do you see them? You're like, hey, remember, we're back here.
Yeah, and they're really not wanting to come back, understandably so.
Yeah. I'd stay there for a bit. Just chill out.
Well, that's why you got to be careful there because, it's very enticing. Talk about an addictive thing where you're like, oh, I don't even have to work on it. Think about it. Experience. Yay. There's none of this like extreme pain involved or self-awareness. I don't even know the truth of myself, So yeah, I like going there. But actually my absolute favorite is just to disidentify it fully into like 11th dimensional perspective where all you have is an ocean of potential energy. Potential energy is very, very quiet. It's like a deep emptiness because nothing has manifested, including sounds. Nothing has manifested from that potentiality. So it's like being in witness consciousness, but deeply seated in this stillness and this emptiness. If I'm really looking for just like everything needs to close down, that's where I'm going.
I'll see you there. So which time-space construct then is wired for the most evolution?
This one. That's why this was all decided upon. I mean, evolution is basically down to self-awareness. And we're not just talking about me and my little human being body. And we're talking about source itself. We could call it source itself, the universe itself, becoming self-aware. This is the construct in this universe that operates according to these laws, including the law of mirroring, where expansion, self-awareness, all of those things is happening the very most. That's why you have so many beings that are wanting to get in here.
Yeah. And talking about that polarity that you mentioned right before, we're learning from this polarity of what is opposite to this, what is opposite to that. But I heard you say once that mankind is questioning whether contrast is the basis upon which all expansion must occur.
Yep.
Where is source right now? Is that changing?
No, because right now there is so much awareness that is being gained from the environment that is containing contrast. But this is one of the questions that gave rise to this entire construct that's in near Lyra is this. What if we could create expansion through no contrast? Does desire even occur in a construct without contrast? That's why source is not on board, right? Because contrast, the experience of the unwanted, is what gives rise to this strong desire. And that's what creates that movement. From unwanted to wanted is what creates the movement or expansion within the universe. So, no, it's not really entertained with that idea currently.
Is desire...
Can I tell you something else? So,
yeah.
When the universe listens to us, collectively broadcasting not only this questioning, but also this desire for a universe that is not based off of contrast, what is heard is not, oh, maybe there's a better way of creating expansion. What it hears is, and accurately so, we're in pain and we don't like it anymore. Okay, so that just means the answer is, what's the resolution for suffering? Not how do we get them out of the entire construct where suffering could even occur.
And I've heard you say you're an expert in human suffering. Rightfully so, based on your own experiences. But from that perspective, then, what is the purpose of the suffering that we're experiencing now as a collective and individually as well?
I'm going to tell you there's no purpose to this suffering. That's what makes suffering such a problem. There's a difference between pain and suffering. When I experience the unwanted, I experience some level of discomfort. We could call that pain, right? You're going to experience pain in your lifetime. That does not need to turn to suffering. Suffering only happens when you have experienced the unwanted that has given rise to what is wanted, and yet XYZ reason is holding you in the unwanted. That is what creates suffering. And inherent within that suffering, especially on a global level right now, is this absolute unwillingness to look at reality. The refusal to stop repeating patterns that are damaging us. Things of this sort. Unnecessary things. That's really why I'm here doing what I'm doing. I'm trying to get people out of the unnecessary so that they can have a dynamic relationship with the necessary contrast. Do you want an example of what I mean?
No, I just wanted to make sure that you were done with your thought. But yeah, for sure, if you want to give an example.
All right, let's say that you were born into a family that has had a really hard time with abundance. That family has had to cope with the lack of abundance in all kinds of ways, whether it's through addictions or whether it's through belief patterns, things like money doesn't grow on trees. Let's just use a really simple one. These repetitive patterns cause immense pain in each progeny that is born into that family line. And they're going to suffer from it too. Obviously, when you're suffering because of a lack of abundance, to believe things like it takes hard work to make anything work is something that you tell yourself to comfort yourself, right? So it's you could say that it's on some level an adaptive strategy to align with that belief. Because of aligning with that belief, though, they're going to teach the next generation. It will take so much hard work to make any amount of money here, and nobody has enough. Okay, well, that person then goes and has to break free from that, right? They're suffering because of this. They don't have the things that they want and need. They don't have a lot of support. The experience of support is not there. Who has any support to give? When they go and they break free from those patterns, let's say they actually manage to be a person who creates a lot of abundance for themselves. Do you think the whole family is going to be like, yay, guess what? Jack found a way to break through all the negative family patterns, and so now we're all going to be abundantly rich. Is that going to be what happens? No. What's going to happen is the family is going to be like, well, you don't belong with us now. Now, what you just did invalidated our whole life. I'm not prepared to see that what I did for the last 30 years was wrong. So now all of a sudden, you've got people dragging sort of the progress of their own family line back into the dirt. They're creating suffering. Now, I would ask you the question, is that necessary?
Not at all.
There we go. So suffering is not necessary.
And I'm thinking of like someone that's programming, right, this time-space construct. It almost seems that suffering was like a glitch, like a malfunction in the construct. Would you see it that way at all? Or is there a bigger purpose to it?
There's a bigger picture. I'm going to tell you that it wasn't expected. It was not expected. What was expected is that every being coming down into a contrasting environment would experience the unwanted, and the level of discomfort would be, I'm moving away from that in the direction of what is wanted, and it would be very quick. There was no expectation that there would be all these thought patterns and behavioral patterns in the way, not just for people, but for certain species, that would hold them almost in alignment with what it is that they are not wanting. So resistance was not accounted for within the overall picture of the consciousness of Source itself.
What do you mean by resistance?
That's resistance. Like I experienced the unwanted. I know based off of this what I would prefer instead, but I'm going to, with my thoughts, words, or actions, resist what I'm wanting. I'm going to choose in the opposite direction of it. Or I'm going to hold a contradictory thought pattern to it. That was not a thing that was even thought of as a potential. So that was a surprise, right? Yeah. So a lot of suffering was a surprise within Source consciousness.
Is that a product of the mind? The ego mind identity? Let's talk about that. How was that created?
The ego mind?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the ego was created when Source asked, what am I? When I say Source, what I mean is the amalgamation of all energy in this universe, which is conscious energy. If you amalgamate all energy of everything that exists, you end up with this, let's say, an ocean of potential energy that is conscious. And that we have to imagine that ocean has no beginning and no end, because everything in existence is it. Now, I know that that's very hard for a human brain, but we got to conceptualize of it in that way, right? So in this ocean of energy, we could call that Source. Some people have called this God. A thought is generated with that energy, right? And that thought was, what am I? That thought is like the most doomed thought ever created. Because the second that thought was thought, it gives something a boundary that does not have any inherent boundaries. I suggest that there is other immediately. You can't give rise to that thought without giving rise to the other thought. It's not possible. Some thoughts must come with a subsequent thought, right? Or a married thought. Let's call it that. Okay, so the concept of other and self was literally born the second that question was asked within Source. And that is the genesis of ego. You could say that in that moment there was a deep sense of loneliness, so visceral. It's one of the worst lonelinesses you will ever experience in your life. Some people, by the way, on the spiritual path will have the opportunity to experience that exact loneliness that was Source's when it thought that thought. That loneliness was so incredibly extreme that Source begins to fragment. It starts to cope by fragmentation. It starts to split itself apart so it can be in relationship with something. Because if all that exists is you, there's nothing to be in relationship to. Of course, the only reason that that's painful is because you thought the thought I. That thought goes away, you're no longer in pain because you don't perceive self and other. But for right now, Source itself starts fragmenting and dividing in all these different ways. And so ultimately right now, every person you look at, even this cup, like everything in existence is a fragmentation of Source consciousness. And each one of these things, because it keeps dividing and dividing in a fractal universe, right? Each one of these things essentially has a sense of self. That's ego. Just a sense of self.
So God created the universe because it got lonely.
Yeah. Well, I should say God created this universe to try to understand itself.
It was in for a wild one. A rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's even realized that. Source is to the point where it's realized that. It's realizing that as it is creating in order to understand itself, it realizes that this is an exponential process. And that whatever it creates basically just proves more that it is an infinite ocean of potentials that never ends. So what's starting to change within Source is the motive for creation. That's pretty interesting to watch.
The motive of creation.
Yeah.
Source is trying to understand why it created all of this.
Well, it understands what it was doing. It's about what it wants to create now and why. What is the motive for creation? If it can no longer be just to understand itself, it kind of is still wanting to understand itself, but it's in a point where it's like, wait a minute, I want to understand myself, so I basically create this and create that. Wait a minute, this is just never going to end. This is a process that's never going to end. I'm an infinite ocean of potential, so why would I create something from me?
So there's a new purpose emerging for what Source wants to create next.
Yes.
Do you have any insight as to what that would be, what that would look like?
No, and I'm going to tell you why. Because Source itself understands that everything that is a part of Source, that's all of us in existence, okay? Right now we're just going to talk about people, but it doesn't just involve people. All right, so let's say that every person is a fragment of Source. In order for Source itself to create what it wants, it has to have the alignment of all parts of itself. That's every one of us. So right now, the deepest motivation within Source consciousness is oneness. Once it can get every part of itself to choose back towards oneness. Okay, you got to think about this right now, because if you're walking on the average street, how many people do you think would be like, yes, I'm choosing back into it? Okay, so every being has to choose back into oneness for it then to make a cohesive choice about what to create. Otherwise, it could potentially be in a zero-sum game against other aspects of itself. Right now, it's trying not to play a zero-sum game of oneness. Because certain aspects of itself are like, no, I like having a sense of self. I don't want to disappear. I suddenly have a concept of death,
Now, there must be other, if the universe is infinite, there must be other species out in the universe that operate sort of like a hive mentality. That's very different from what we experience, which is the most extreme individualization ever created, maybe. So where do you see the species that operate as a hive versus sort of what we created here as everyone's different, individualized free will?
Hive minds are, of course I would think that though, because I'm coming at this from the perspective of my own human mind. The hive mind is an override. It's very different than what we call a group consciousness. The group consciousness is like a microcosm of what the universe is trying to create, right? Where parts of itself essentially add their unique angle or perspective to the collective, and then the collective makes a decision, and none of the parts would disagree because they contain the awareness of all the different parts. It's like if I took your enemy and I put that person inside your skin, and you could not perceive a differentiation between your thoughts and that person's thoughts. You would very quickly arise at an answer. Right? So that's a group consciousness. There are some, especially six-dimensional beings, that have that consciousness. The hive mind is very different. It's superbly hierarchical. You've essentially got one leader who, in some way, establishes their power over the entire group, and everybody else is subservient. In those groups, though, many of them experience a kind of pleasure in not having any say in the matter. So what do you want to know about that in the context of what we were talking about?
Let's keep going down. I like it.
This has turned into a super esoteric conversation.
I had a feeling it would. Well, in terms of the hive mind versus what we created here.
Okay.
We've seen a lot of hierarchy throughout humanity for many centuries. Do you think that's changing in a way?
The hierarchy we've experienced is very different to what is experienced in a hive mind. That's the first thing to say. I think that right now hierarchy is being challenged in a way that is unprecedented within the human race. To generalize, there has, throughout history been this real drive towards there being some form of leadership, but the ability almost for the people to control that leadership. And right now there's such a disillusionment around leadership in general, especially in the Gen Z generation, that there's a desire to do away with all power structures.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty entertaining to watch, actually.
What about our generation do you see that is giving rise to that mentality?
Pain with authority figures. And a lot of that pain doesn't even need to be about abuse of power. It's about misleading. So many of these generations that are younger generations right now that are on the planet have felt so misled by the older generations, by anybody in a position of authority. And there's this attitude of, wait a minute, I saw behind the velvet curtain and I see how much of you doing this for me is really just you doing it for you. So let's just get straight, So there's because of this, there's a major distrust of authority figures. There's a desire for a kind of I'll say a social structure that is level rather than in tiers. And nobody knows how to create that, of course.
Yeah.
Especially in the Gen Z culture, because when people get damaged relative to power, they want power. So the shadow that you'll start to see is people being like, screw the power systems while I myself become more powerful, So
I mean, even looking at TikTok, what's going on where, even over 2020, we just saw a rise to a bunch of like 15, 16-year-olds that just became insanely famous, viral. And that's in a way sort of an expression of, oh, now I have power because more people are following me than you. Like there's 16-year-olds that have more followers than Donald Trump in a way.
Yep.
Interesting. How can that fame, just for fame's sake, have a negative effect toward any generation in that matter?
Well, fame is a bloody nightmare. I can tell you that myself. Fame is a nightmare most people are not prepared for. And especially when people are very young. I mean, I could point to all kinds of, detrimental experiences that could arise out of somebody that is able to gain that much power that quickly in such a strange way, right? And so many people. But, ultimately, I feel like what fame does more than anything else, and what people don't understand that it does, is it destroys social connections. It turns all of your social arrangements in your life into what it was in a royal court in the 1500s. We have not graduated past this way of being around people who have any kind of influence or power or the kinds of resources that we want. So if you take a person and you destroy the foundation of their social relationships, which is what fame does, what you have is a very unstable person. You have basically a person whose castle is built on quicksand. And that's a person who's really fragile, like a person who's fragile, especially to being damaged in other ways by sources who would wish to exploit them and all kinds of dangerous experiences.
Yeah. And I heard you speak on, Teal, of the restoration of the tribe, and finding people who fit with us. That is sort of the antidote to that isolation that things like fame give a rise to. So let's talk about that restoration of tribe. Where do you see humanity headed in that direction?
Okay, we need to go back to our past for this one. This is also a conversation people don't like very much. Okay.
Can't please anyone, everyone.
Human beings, in our deepest nature, are a tribal species. I do believe we can get to a point where we can be connected to one human tribe, regardless of what tribe necessarily that we live in. But when it comes to our living arrangements, we are meant to be living in tribe. That means family and chosen family, right? Living in these types of group settings is the most healthy for us. But we have gone away from this. We've gone away from this towards the single family household setup, and even now the broken single family household setup, and there is no person that can thrive in that. So what we have right now is like people who are just figuring out how to survive in a structure that is not healthy for them. And that's the reason why people are not doing well. But they don't know that because they have never seen that structure. Outside the context of stories about, cowboys and Indians and things like this, like, people have really lost touch with the fact that the way that they've lived for thousands of years since we turned into an agrarian species is very, very fundamentally unhealthy for us. As we start to wake up to this, and for some people this will be conscious in a way where they will be like, wait a minute. Haha, I actually know that human beings lived for millions of years tribally before, this weird shift where religion stepped in and said that female belongs to that male, so we have to control her sexuality and make sure that the progeny is his so that he can pass his land to someone else. Like, they're going to basically wake up and be like, wait, we've been controlled for thousands of years, we're going to not do this anymore. And they're going to step into conscious tribe that way. For other people, it's not even going to be that mental. It's going to be like, this is awful. I don't have enough resources. So they're going to just be going towards resources and end up in this type of a situation. Humanity is going to pull like so strongly in the direction of group living and conscious communities. And it's going to start to take on this really cool new look, because instead of it just being about, the hippies who are living on these sort of self-sustaining farms and raising their kids weird and all of that, it's going to take on a modern twist for people too. And this is why I'm watching Gen Z, by the way, because Gen Z is the one that's really going to start to do this, because they're going to be left after the boomers die with real estate you cannot imagine. Like, real estate where it's like, what are we going to do with this crap, and they're going to have to repurpose it. And when it comes to repurposing a lot of this, especially commercial real estate, there's going to be a big push towards bringing people back into living as groups. And those groups are not necessarily going to all look hippie. Like, you're even going to see like medical students all deciding to cohabitate in like a giant building at one time and set up these dynamic relationships where they're all kind of supporting each other is ultimately what they're doing. You're going to see that popping up big time with single mothers. Right now, you've even got that in Scandinavia. It's big time popping up all over the place, where you've got single moms, especially, that are just like, I can't do this. And so they're moving in, together into these places, and they're switching days of who watches whose kids. So it's like with a modern twist, things are starting to take on a lot more of the structure that they would have taken on when we were living in a natural state, before we got ourselves all out of whack with our behaviors of planting things rather than being foragers. And I honestly, like, people are going to feel so much more satiated and nourished by that setup. I'm not going to say it's going to be simple, because you add more people and it's, of course, more complex, but you have like much more support. And right now, people are so under-resourced. It's hard for people to understand this, of course, because right now it's like, wait a minute, the average person has more than, a king in the 1500s has, in terms of the, lifestyle that they're experiencing, the level of luxury, like their access to things, more information, everything, right? But we are severely under-resourced in terms of our most basic needs, especially socially and especially emotionally. And that's what's going to change when we go back to this sort of group-based living arrangement.
Wow, this is a huge topic. And I'd be really curious to know what we can pull from indigenous cultures, because you said that we've been living in tribe for millions of years. There are still I'm from Colombia, so I know that there's still very indigenous tribes that live around in the Sierra Nevada in Colombia. Like, what can we pull from those cultures to restore that sense of living, more in groups and in harmony with nature?
got all kinds of things. I mean, if we would be smart, we would be studying exactly what they're doing that's detrimental to them and exactly what they're doing that's beneficial. Their mentality around rites of passage should be something that we start to bring over. The ways that they're growing their food in ways that are benefiting the web of life, as opposed to what we're doing is stuff that we need to pull over. I could be here all day long because it like depends on the one. I'm pretty sure if I went to one tribe versus another tribe, I'd be like, genius, 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 genius. So it's like we're basically the people who are going to be studying these types of cultures so as to bring these things over and kind of update them for modern people in the modern world. Are going to be working with a great many things that they themselves have been practicing for thousands of years. At the same time, what we're trying to move into is not like a regression into tribe. We're trying to go into the updated version of tribe, because what we know is that there was a great many shadows in tribe. I mean, when you've got a social species, let's say that human being is a social species, and so we're deeply dependent on our social connections. That opens the door really wide for us to get into, things like consensus thinking and, tyranny and all of the things that would make most people, when I have this conversation about tribe, go, I have to consider 800 people. It was hard enough for me to consider my mom, So we're trying to take what does work while discarding what doesn't work and create just better ways of functioning as a group, right? I'm not going to say that's easy, but I will say that these tribal groups, which are going to start popping up, they're not going to be called tribes. Okay, I'm calling them that. But these groups that are going to start popping up are going to become like a microcosm in which we start to develop healthier ways of coexisting. And that's what's going to then bleed out into governments and things like that. I don't think this is going to be a top-down evolution. I really think this is going to be a bottom-up evolution within society.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, once you've understood this is how we get along with each other in this group, you kind of blow it up to the macrocosm and we're like, how do we get along with that country over there?
And yeah, immediately when you were talking about that, of the shadow side of tribes, I thought about the Aztec culture, where because of their beliefs of reality that they believe that their gods left them, they had to start participating in sacrifices, human sacrifices. And a lot of that has to do with their beliefs about the nature of reality. Who is their God? In many instances, maybe they were living amongst another extraterrestrial species that left them, and then they just wanted them back because they helped them with their technology. Who knows? I'm making things up. So yeah, that was a rabbit hole that we can open about.
No, I'm glad you saw that, because what it means is that you recognize that there's shadows in tribe.
Yeah.
And we got to avoid those shadows while understanding that we need to go back towards tribe in order to actually have our needs met as a social species.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that also tied in with the spiritual beliefs of a culture. Where do you see humanity evolving their beliefs around religion, around what is the greater nature of reality? Do you think that's going to change at all with quantum physics and everything that's coming out?
Spirituality is going to become a lot more personalized. Religion's going to disappear. Why? Because religion is really about social control. It's about agreeing to a set of rules and a reason why those rules exist so that people will behave a certain way. And what people are going to start to wake up to is that all of that crap is not necessary in order to have a direct connection to what is non-physical. So, I may be somebody who can sit here and look at the different positive elements that are inherent in each religion at the same time as telling you I'm telling you it's going to be a thing we look at in the past as something that people used to do once. Whoa.
You're a modern way shower, Teal. And I feel like the more people I also talk to in my generation are opening up, or have already opened up psychically, extrasensory perception, all of it. So, I know that you didn't grow up in the best conditions for that. How can the new generations come in, and how can the parents of today and tomorrow raise their children in an awareness that we're connected much more than just the five senses? Hello, beautiful souls. I am so sorry to leave you on such a cliffhanger, but that concludes part 1 of this beautiful conversation with Teal Swan, a person that is revolutionizing so many aspects of our society with her thought process, her deep insight, the way that she views the world. It's been a pleasure and honor to be able to share this conversation with you. We covered so much. We went very esoteric. We went practical. We went deep. And the second part of the conversation, if I may tell you, is beyond mind-blowing. We actually get into the weaves of what the new earth is going to become, what different structures we're seeing in the world, from education, relationships, having ownership of the self-mastery that we are meant to be leading in this lifetime. So this will come out in just a few days. If it has not come out already, you will see the link to part 2 in the show notes, and you can head on over and watch the rest of the conversation. If it is not out yet, make sure to subscribe to this channel, turn on the notification bell so you will be notified when the next episode comes out. And be sure to join us in this beautiful community that we're co-creating with amazing conversations, amazing guests. It means the world to me that you are a part of this. And I am so excited to continue this process of unfolding, learning alongside you. So if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with your friends, your community, your family. And I'd love to hear from you down in the comments what you took out of this conversation. What insights, what teachings will you take away? Because the more we integrate these teachings, the better on we'll be able to lead a life of embodiment, of integration. So I'm really curious, and I read all of these comments, by the way. So I'm super, super excited to hear from you. And with all the love, this community is filled with love, and I can feel you from here. Thank you. And we will see you on the next episode, the next conversation of Just Tap In. Much love.